This is for the folks in Illinois.
Oh, great.
Just say hi.
Great.
We thought we'd take us up to Illinois since we couldn't bring all the accountants down here and the bookkeepers. So,
Yeah,
Dr. Tutera.
I've met him. I've met most of them.
Most of them have seen him and recognize him.
And one thing about Doc, he was a very, very generous person.
Can't say enough about his integrity.
He was always very compassionate.
He embraced his life, and he embraced others every step of the way.
He was very strong, physically strong and emotionally strong.
My father gave the gift of fatherly love, family, and faith to each person his path would cross.
It's such a good feeling to hug somebody. You know?
It is, definitely.
And it's just a nice feeling to know every day you're being hugged by somebody. I don't care. It's a good feeling. And I'm sorry I never said that to Uncle Dominic. Every time he talked to me, I love you, Bay. I love you, Bay, you know, but I never had a chance to tell him how much I really loved him. Oh, Bay, I really love Doc.
My paternal grandparents, my nanny, her name was Conchatina, she was born in Naples. As I understand it, shortly after she was born, her mother died. And her father, I think, abandoned her. And she essentially grew up in a convent. When she was around 16, 17 years old, her two uncles brought her to the United States. And she settled in Kansas City with them. I do know that my grandparents met in Kansas City, and their first house was on Olive Street in the historic Northeast, where it ended up that all of the cousins lived. Uncle Scoots, Uncle Fatty.
True happiness was about that family environment. Having a close-knit, happy family was it, and I think he grew up in that environment. He grew up in an area of Northeast Kansas City where there was lots of cousins and aunts and uncles, and
We was one big happy family, the cousins, the uncles, the aunts.
Everybody lived pretty much on Olive and Lexington.
And he came from pretty humble beginnings.
Doc's father was in World War I, and he had complications medically, either associated with the war or after. And eventually, Doc's father died when he was 16 years old.
But growing up as kids, teenagers, we had a lot of fun. Really, Doc, his brother Henry, and myself were inseparable.
For some number of years, Doc would talk about how when he was growing up that his father had died young, that they would go to the VA hospital in Excelsior Springs, that his dad had stayed there for quite an extended period of time and had gathered a real strong respect for the physicians. It was very important for Doc, number one, to be able to honor his name, and that a very great way of doing that, and the best and highest profession that he could imagine for his son would be to be a physician. So he told his dad that he wanted him to be a physician.
He would compare himself to his brother Henry, who he thought was even smarter than he was, but Henry never got an education.
World War II starts. He gets drafted into the Navy. He goes into the medical corps, comes back, goes to Rockhurst College.
My dad did not finish high school. He went to De La Salle. Dominic went off to medical school, so they were kind of different.
Doc went off to school. I went to work for him as a bartender. And I worked for him for about 2 or 3 years. Then I went off on my own.
My dad was working at Columbia Inn, which was the family restaurant and bar. And at one point in time, early on in going to medical school, Dominic came home and kind of thought, I'm not sure that I'm cut out for this.
He had a big connection to medicine. He was, good with biology, numbers. He liked the sciences. That wasn't so much a problem, but from a social perspective, as a young man growing up, he's growing up in with all of his cousins and his brother and his aunts and uncles, and they are running the Columbia Inn. They're in the bar industry and restaurant.
My grandmother said, and my poppy said, you're gonna work in the bar with Henry. He was there for a short amount of time and realized absolutely not.
And of course, he had the continual encouragement of his aunt and uncle, and that his father had left a pledge with to them as well, that you will see that Dominic becomes a physician.
I said, well, you got the qualifications that I'm looking for. You're Catholic, you're Italian, and you're a doctor, so I really can't go any better than that.
My mom has good stories about when Dominic and Lucille got married.
And I thought of this morning, how lucky I am that either I or my father chose Doc, because in the olden days, your parents help you choose your spouse.
He loved Lucille. They were terrific together. I don't think I ever saw them be cross with each other.
Doc loved his children.
He loved his family. He loved the Italian traditions.
But he exhibited the family values. I mean, he was like the gladiator. I remember when he passed and I had to do my little bit on the altar, and all the in-laws, which at the time were 4 of us, were going to say something, and the only thing I could think of is I went to the dictionary and I looked up the word like power and strength. And and my whole thing was all the words that meant power and strength, and that was him. He was a total leader. He was a family leader. He was a business leader. He was a community leader. And with all of us, he gave us total direction, always in the right way, the right direction. And many times we, as younger people, would stray a certain way. And he was the I-70 of our family. He was the straight shot.
It wasn't easy, kids. Your dad still had to do his residency, his internship, and he did another year of rotation before you kids even realized.
Dad was working night and day.
He would go to the different hospitals and work on the weekends.
We would all get in the car and go down there and have lunch with him. 1, to be with him, but 2, because it was cheaper than him eating in the cafeteria.
When we would pack Dad's lunch and you kids would sit in the back of the car and we'd bring him something to eat and we'd stay in the car so you could visit with your dad, because night after night after night, he had lots and lots of nights in a row with him trying to work at other places.
And he was strict. I mean, it was a lot of things that, growing up, Peach and I wanted to do that we weren't able to do. That's kind of maybe that old school Italian of, just kind of keeping your thumb on it. I remember he always told you how great you were and how beautiful you were and how much he loved you. He had those eyes that were so dark and the white around him and that big smile.
I remember he and Lucille, who was quite pregnant, walked over from their lot next door in their construction house as they were building next to my folks. That was probably about 1961 or 62. So I was really upset when I learned that they were going to be building a house next door, and as the construction went along, because that was a vacant lot and we had a pretty nice baseball field there, and we'd come home from school and play home run derby pretty much every day. So when I found out we were losing our ball field, I wasn't too happy. As soon as the construction got going and we realized there was going to be a swimming pool, things started to lighten up a little bit. And when they moved in the first day, they came over and brought us a key to the swimming pool and said, "This is your key and you can come anytime you want to and swim." So I thought that was a pretty good trade-off.
Respect with Doc, you got to give respect to get respect. It was another life lesson.
Connie and I dated for about 3 years. Then we decided we would get engaged. I mean, we literally had gone to St. Louis and visited my aunt and uncle. As, you know, my father would have demanded and everybody else, I needed to go to Doc to ask for her hand in marriage. And I remember it being a sweaty pit kind of a situation. You know, he was a forceful, strong man. Have you ever seen the size of his hands?
He had these like bear, claw type hands.
They were like clubs. He and my dad, they had fingers that were like this. I mean, they were like big. I mean, like, how do you begin? What do you say? And how do you tell a girl's father, especially a very dominant Italian male that he was, do I have your permission for your daughter's hand in marriage? You know, that was just like, oh my God, what if he says, no way in hell? He was sitting in his office, and I went in and I closed the door, and he immediately kind of jerked back like, what is going to be happening here? You know, because first of all, Doc could close the door on you, but you weren't closing the door on Doc, you know? Basically what I said, I've been around a long time, and your daughter and I have discussed the possibilities of really making this a permanent situation, and I would like to have your permission. He didn't say yes, he didn't say no. He looked at me and he says, and by the way, that trip to St. Louis was bullshit. Now that you've gotten that off your chest, we were with my aunt and uncle. I said, it wasn't anything questionable. I says, now do I have your permission? He says, well, it's about goddamn time.
He gave so much of himself every single day that it's hard for me to define one generous act.
Doc was a physician. He loved it. He loved every aspect of it.
He felt that when he delivered children into this world, they were all gifts from God. And as he touched that child for the first time, as it was being delivered, he always said he felt like he was touching God.
We'd go to an event here in Kansas City, whether it was at the Mulebach Towers or wherever, and these women would come up that he delivered children for, had delivered their babies, and they just loved them.
All I've ever heard all my life is the golden hands, or, the kind touch, or, he was the fastest surgeon.
He delivered anywhere from 21 to 23 babies a month, and with nobody else helping him. He loved it, he did it well, and that again is what hard work is. And that's the reason why he built his practice the way that it was.
It's more than just a woman coming in, yeah, you're pregnant, come in every 6 weeks or whatever. Yeah, we're gonna deliver this baby. Goodbye, it's nice, send me a check. That wasn't him at all.
Didn't matter how busy he was, though. He never missed our functions. He never when he wasn't delivering a baby, he was very hands-on. Now, we missed a few father-daughter dances where Uncle Henry had to step in because, you're on your way. It's a Friday night. What are you going to do? Got to call Uncle Henry.
And of course, my Uncle Henry was around when we were growing up. And when we were, I remember, and sometimes he was around even, as much as my dad was. I mean, but whenever he came over, that was, bonus time because he was so entertaining. So it's like if you in our deal, it's like if you got to go to the Thanksgiving dinner or the Easter or the holiday, whatever it was, and you got to go over to like Uncle Henry's house, or even if you were at our house and Uncle Henry was going to come over, that was like the best thing ever for a kid, because the guy, he was so incredibly entertaining. He was extremely talented and funny. You know, he could play the banjo, he could play the guitar, he'd sing, he'd play the piano, he'd tell these jokes. Particularly, it was more so I remember with the summer, probably during the weekends, it's like they'd be building a building, and then after they were, you know, when Uncle Henry would, you know, leave the construction site, he'd come over to the house. So when he'd come over to the house, he'd jack around with us for a bit.
And so Mom was really good at always, when it was something that he needed to be at and she couldn't fill in the gap, that somebody else was on call so that we didn't miss the function. You know, if he was not delivering a baby, he was at the basketball game or the tennis match or the football game. But if he was, we knew that was the priority.
And one of the things that he said to me, I delivered every single baby from every single woman that was ever a patient. So he was a man of high integrity. He had no doubt, he thought that that was the best thing. If you're going to start something, finish it and be there for him to present it.
He would come to visit my father at the construction sites because he loved construction the whole time that my dad was doing it. He loved going to the trailer. He loved being out in the field. And then in return, my dad would go visit him in the hospitals or at his medical office. And my dad would always say to me that without fail, they would plan to go have lunch, for example. And my dad would get to the office and Dominic would be on the phone with the patient. And my dad would just sit and wait and, you know, say, Tom, come on, let's go. It's time to go to lunch. And he'd say, no, just wait. I have to talk to this woman. She's so worried about her pregnancy. And he would spend hours on the phone with the patients and be completely there by their sides. I mean, he absolutely loved being a doctor.
So he really worked hard at all hours, and he would come home dragging and in his scrubs, and you could tell how hard he worked, but you could also tell that he was really committed and really enjoyed it. I know he influenced his cousin, who actually was more like a nephew, although he was a cousin. He was much younger, and that's Gino Tutera. And Gino went in to OBGYN. He said, I want to be just like Doc. I want to do it just like that. He told me that one day, actually. So I know he had an influence on Gino in that way, and I think he probably had an influence on me as well.
He would be in the family room and us, you know, girls were all in the kitchen, whatever, talking, and he hated for anybody to ever talk about anybody. I mean, you would never hear him say anything bad about anybody.
My birth was very difficult for my mom because 3 days before I was born, her mother died. My mom mentally told herself that she could not deliver me until she buried her mother. Dominic kept saying to her, Josephine, you gotta let this go. You gotta have this baby. I want you to go to the funeral, and then you're coming straight over here because you're gonna have this baby and your body's gonna get more and more toxic if you don't deliver this child. I guess my delivery was a little bit harder than Tina's delivery, my sister, and also my mom was 40 when she had me. She remembers being in the delivery room with Dominic, and she was in a tremendous amount of pain, and he said to her, I want you to look at this clock above my head, and we're gonna count this together. She was in a lot of pain, and he was kind of teasing her a little bit, and so she remembers screaming at him and saying, you just want to see me suffer. You just absolutely want to see me suffer. And she said he kind of just went like this and giggled at her and walked out of the room and then came back in and she delivered me.
Doc was really good at work-family balance.
He treated me like a brother, and I called him a brother.
Doc's best friend was Jerry Nerman. He loved spending time with him, and Doc would always say that if anybody should tell you that they've got two best friends, they're lying. If anybody would ever have, if you can be fortunate enough to have one best friend, then that's a hell of an accomplishment. He really endeared and loved that relationship. It was like it's like they spoke every day. Best of pals hanging out together, could go on vacations together.
One of the first things Doc asked me, he said, look, he says, do you want to be a sausage maker all your life? Because I think I could give you a future. Well, I said, it's not like I woke up one day and said I want to be a sausage maker. That's my family direction and my family destiny. At this point in my life, my dad needs me to be a sausage maker. Frankly, I'm not sure Doc was impressed that I was a sausage maker. I'm not sure that he wanted to go through and say, this is my son-in-law, Anthony, he's a sausage maker. It doesn't have the same ring as something a little bit more professional sounding. But as time went on, life changes. I took a different direction. I'm now part of the family. I'd like to think I'm a productive part of the family. And I can honestly say I have never been happier.
In my own children, well, I just have one, John David, and he is the special guy in this family, in all of our families, I'd have to say. When he was born, now see, you're going to get me here. Dad was in the room, and my doctor wanted to know if he wanted to deliver the baby, but he couldn't do it. It was too emotional for him. My doctor, said that it was the most cosmic delivery she's ever had, because she's never, out of all the babies she ever delivered, she had never, had so much love in one room. We find out John David has autism, right? We're right here. And who knew what that was 16, 17 years ago? And within 2 weeks, it was like, we've got to get into the children's spot. Where is the children's spot? The children's spot is in the daycare center at St. Luke's Hospital that Dad built back at the time that he was building, the Broadway Medical Building, all the buildings out off of 435. We get our appointment to go in there, and we're walking through, and it's all the same fabric, all the same carpeting, all the same cabinets. It was like Dad was right there.
Family was really important to Doc and Lucille, and they adopted me. Within months of me working at Plaza Manor, I was in their home a lot. Joe and I would work till 2 a.m. In the beginning, setting up nursing homes, getting the systems ready. And 2 a.m. we'd go over to Doc and Lou's to eat, and Lou would put out a buffet for us.
He and Lucille bought Joe, their son, a watch, a Rolex wristwatch.
When I graduated from high school, my parents wanted to do something real nice for me, and not so much that I was really expecting anything, but I think it's like, hey, this is Joe. He's going to go off to Boston College, and he wants to go into business. And I think they connected that with, well, I'm going to go get him a really nice gold watch.
I had a Rolex wristwatch, and they wanted to know if I had a box. So I gave them my box that the Rolex came in. They gave it to Joe for graduating or whatever.
So they got me this Rolex watch, this gold Rolex watch, and I remember it's like, wow, it's like that would kind of be the last of my of things that I would have ever expected.
Turns out, months later, he was talking to his mother or his father and said, something's wrong with this watch.
Pretty soon, the watch starts turning my wrist green. And it's like, wait a minute. So I'm calling back to my mom. It's like, hey, Mom, something's wrong with this thing. It's like, what is this deal?
Of course, it was a phony like they sell in New York City. And I said to them when they bought it, I said, for God's sakes, you guys can afford a real Rolex, go buy them one.
And I think when I came back maybe for Christmas that first year, then I got the real McCoy.
We were down in the rec room with the pool table, and Susie was swinging me around the pool table just by my arm. All of a sudden, she let go, and I landed on the pool table, and I was in a lot of pain. I had dislocated my shoulder. I went upstairs, and Uncle Dominic stood me in front of him and said, "Okay, Bae, what happened?" And I was crying, and I told him, and he kind of felt my arm, and he said, "Okay, Bae, this is gonna hurt just a tiny bit." And he just kind of cracked my arm back into its socket right there in the kitchen. And it was it.
I just think he was his own person. And if you look at the era that we grew up and the culture that we came from, so many people stayed in the same roles. They stayed in the same houses. They passed them on from generation to generation. You worked for your father in whatever business he was in. Dominic was his own person, always.
For whatever reason, I don't know if it was kind of born into him or for whatever it is, but there was this love for development, construction. His father-in-law, Joe Cerise, was a bit of a developer. He accumulated real estate. He was an electrician and a plumber. He had KC or Cerise Power and Light. Phenomenal person in his own right, somebody that my dad very much respected. And when you get to, say, the mid-'70s or the early '70s, there was quite a bit of this real estate that needed to be redeveloped. Something. I mean, they had been now shuttered for 10, 15 years, and it was like to build these businesses, and it were open one day, and the next day the doors were closed, and they were kind of mothballed right at that point in time. So I remember going out there to those properties, and one of the first things that Doc redeveloped was the Raytown trailer plant, where they manufactured universal trailers. When he first walked in that building, it was exactly like it was the day that it had been shuttered, back in 1959 or 60. The tools were still there, the inventory was still there, the partially assembled trailers were still there. He stepped in and it's like, hey, we're gonna go redevelop this deal. And so he did, and he went and said the buildings by that time were kind of falling apart, and he developed this, took this 300,000 square feet of space and turned it back into operable space, leased it out, and that was pretty cool.
One of the very first meetings I ever had with Dominic in the room got pretty loud. And he had two sons, Joe and Mike. I've seen him yell pretty good at delivering the message to them of what is important and not important. I never really paid that much attention to it till one day it was my turn to get yelled at. And he was really getting in me pretty good.
I heard about his anger from my father, and apparently he had this kind of explosive personality and this toughness ever since he was a kid. I mean, and I've heard stories from other people who are about my dad's age and went to grade school with them about how tough Doc was. And even my dad would say Dominic was the tough one. Like, nobody wanted to mess with Dominic.
And these other two guys were sitting over there in a corner laughing at me. And boy, once he got done and walked out, I turned to Mike and Joe and I said, "What are you laughing at?" And he says, "Don't you get it? If he didn't yell at you, he didn't like you. It's when he quits talking to you, you're done."
When I was in college, what would typically happen is I'd have something I needed to talk to Uncle Dominic about. He gave Aunt Lucille strict orders. I don't care where I am or what I'm doing. When Anna Marie calls, put me on the phone with her. So they had that agreement. But I would call and I'd have something, of course. I was in college. I was very dramatic. There were boyfriends, all kind, academics. And I would call him and he would pick up the phone and he just had this way. I can't replicate how he would say things, but I loved his voice. But he would always say, Anna Marie, how you doing, babe? What's going on? And I could just see him sitting in his chair, you know, just listening. And I would tell him a problem, and he'd say, oh, babe, don't worry about it. I mean, I could tell him anything, and that was always the response. Don't worry about it. Everything's going to be okay. And I would say, you're not going to tell my dad, are you? No, babe, I would never do that. I would never tell your dad. Don't you worry about it. And it never failed. 10, 15 minutes later, I'd get a call from my dad. Hey, Annie, what's going on? Nothing. How you doing? Is everything okay? Everything's fine. You talked to your Uncle Dominic at all today? And of course I couldn't lie, and I would say, yeah, I did. I talked to him about 20 minutes ago. Oh, okay. All right. Just wanted to know if you had talked to him. Well, obviously, after he hung up the phone with me, Dominic would call my dad immediately, tell my dad everything. And this would go on for years. And I knew it was happening, but I loved it.
My favorite memories of Doc is he would come down and he said, we're going to lunch. And we would drive around the Northeast. And then we'd end up like at Denny's there across from the stadium. And we would have lunch. And he would tell stories the entire time. And then we're driving back down 435 to get to Gregory. And of course he would whip out his insulin shot. And I said, Doc, you want me to hold the steering wheel while you do that? And no, he just unbuttoned his shirt. Do it. It was a 3-second motion. We'd get back to the office and he'd say, well, you know, thanks for going to lunch. We'll have to do it again in a couple weeks.
The one thing that we all learned from him and from Mom was you can't be lazy. And that's the reason why I want the farmer's house, because it's all about work. You know, when you work and you do something, it makes you feel good about yourself. Dad taught us that. I mean, look at him. He could, there is nothing he couldn't do, from delivering babies to building buildings and just being a good friend to sit and talk and know.
We were home one day and it was in the middle of the night, and thank God he was home, and the phone rang. And they said, this is the police department. We need to talk to Mary Cerise. He says, well, I'm sorry. She's old and she's not here. She's sleeping. Well, then we'll take the daughter. And he said, well, this happens to be the daughter's husband, and what do you want with her? Well, their building is burning down on 9th Street, and we want one of them down here right now. My husband spoke up and said, well, put the fire out. You're the fireman, and there's no insurance on that building, so we don't really care. Let it burn. So I'm sure they thought maybe somebody set it on fire, but he set them straight.
One of the employees was screaming at a vendor on the telephone, and he went in there and literally ripped the phone out of the wall, threw the phone across the room, and said, you will never talk to anybody like that. I don't care who they are. Walked off, and within 5 minutes, want to go to lunch, Bay? It was just over.
My dad was a planner. He made his life planning things, and I think this is something that he and Dominic had in common, and maybe one of the reasons why they got along so well, because Dominic always had a plan to develop something in his business or in his practice. You could see that even as he taught me how to play pool. He taught me that good pool players were several shots ahead of in the game, and that where you leave the ball, the cue ball after the shot, was as important as the shot itself, so that you could line up the next shot. And he did that in his personal life. He knew the importance of education so that could serve as a building block for his next career. And he learned a lot about medicine, and that served as a building block for that next career, which was construction of medical buildings, and then also ultimately nursing facilities and other medical facilities. So he was always a step ahead and always thinking down the line.
Yeah, but we spent a lot of time with my Uncle Henry that was running the crew. Eventually we started doing construction together and building retail centers and tenant finishes.
He loved building buildings with my dad. He loved the whole process of architecture, design, construction. He loved all of that.
He took chances. He started off with, building medical buildings, after he got out of the medical practice. And he literally sets the standards by which the rest of the retirement community in Kansas City is judged. He was the pioneer.
He built the Broadway Medical Building. He built Plaza Manor, I think that opened up in '83. I graduated college in '85. Mike's working with Uncle Henry doing tenant finish work and small construction projects. And we start Columbia Construction as a company to go out and build these strip centers, small unanchored strip centers. So we're blowing and going on that, and Doc's still working full time. Mike is acquiring land, lining up tenants. I'm doing financing, development type stuff. Uncle Henry's doing the construction. We're blowing and going through that. Doc eventually gets to spend more and more time there, but it takes him like a year to kind of wind down his practice because he had pledged, 30 years earlier. It's like, if I take you on as a patient, I'm going to see you through. So you got at least a 9-month period there that you got to go see the last of your patient through, even once you stop. So there was this gradual wind down.
And we were doing design build before anybody even called it design build. And it seemed like every day we had a new project, and it was always something going on. And seeing the family every day, became a pretty big part of my life. And Dominic was a true mentor to me. Dominic necessarily wasn't an innovator as much as he was sort of a genius. He could see the entire battlefield at one time, and he could control the pieces and parts that needed to move at the correct time to get a result that he wanted.
And he said, let's see what's in this big steel chest that was sitting on the outside of the proposed building. He slammed the thing shut, and my finger was in there, part of it. So, it hurt like all get out. And he says, you want a shot? Well, I said, yeah. I thought he meant a shot of whiskey, but he pulled out a hypodermic needle and gave me a cortisone shot or whatever.
Well, Dad and I spent a ton of time in California together, back when we had all these nursing homes out there, and we'd drive down the coast and we'd go to each nursing home. Now, I would drive because he was the worst driver and nobody would ever want to ride with him. And then the older he got, it was just like, hand me the keys, I'm not riding with you. I mean, everybody will tell you that same story. You were scared to death to be in the car with him. He and I both shared this passion for decorating and interior design and color, and so we would go and remodel nursing homes and decorate the condo and pick out new ones, and that was the thing the two of us did all the time.
I mean, he was mechanical. I thought he liked doing things with his hands. He was very dexterous. It was heavy labor. That was all good. Technical things, plumbing, electrical, that was all good.
I mean, he would come home in the middle of the afternoon and work on the kitchen counter or something. I mean, like grouting it or doing a project at home. He did every single thing at home. Between him and Mom, there was no such thing as a handyman, a yard man, or anything. I mean, they did every single thing.
Doc wanted to do most of the work. He put in all the electrical, he put in all the lights. But I would come over at noon every day to check on him because he'd sneak away from the office and he'd come over here to work. And he was generally by himself. One afternoon I came by with a friend of mine and I could hear him. I could see a ladder and I could hear him in the house somewhere, but I couldn't figure out where he was. And he was hollering for me, Dave, come here and help me. I need some help. Well, he had climbed up the ladder to the vent up there, and he had dropped his screwdriver down into the vent. And while he was reaching to go get the screwdriver, the ladder fell out from underneath him. So he'd been hanging up in that vent for a half an hour knowing that I was coming to get him. So I had to put the ladder back underneath him and crawl up there and pull him out of the vent. But he was all, for me, he was always doing something like that.
Happy birthday, dear Grandpa. Happy birthday to you. And many more.
We can hang this right there.
How did you know? How did you know?
We'll blow the candles out now.
There is no candle.
Yeah,
Huh?
man, sure.
You don't see them, Mary? Where are they? Hannah, we got the birthday boy, he's 60, what are you,
Dominic.
59 years old now?
I wish it was.
Oh, Candy knows where the candles are.
Very nice.
Oh, pretty.
I believe that he embraced his retirement in that way. You know, he loved going to Palm Springs. He loved to play golf. He loved being around his family. And I think that he very much lived in the present. And I think he worked really hard. And that, I think, is incredibly admirable. But I think he also was able to find a way to really enjoy his life at the same time.
I saw Doc just before he went off to Palm Springs. He was in the office, and we were talking about several things, and I think I even rode down the elevator with him. Everything seemed fine.
The family's getting together for dinner, like we always would. So we hop in the car, we're driving down to the Chinese restaurant to go pick up the carry-out, and Doc said, you know, we're just quiet in the car, and he you know, he turns to me and says, I love you. You've done, I'm very proud of you. I'm really proud of what you've accomplished, and I love you. And it was kind of, it was different. It was something that definitely stood out. It's like he had a message that he wanted to deliver. We were in the car alone. He wanted to say that. Of course, I told him that I loved him as well, and thanked him for everything that he had done for me. And that's the last time that I was ever, and that's the last time that I was able to spend with Doc by myself.
We're inside watching, in the family room, watching the shows. They have all the interior design stuff and show all these condos. And Dad walks in and goes, you guys are in here watching this crap on TV. I'm going to go back out here and watch the History Channel. It was time for all of us to go to bed, and Mom gets John David and I set up. All of a sudden, I heard Mom screaming. And I knew immediately that it wasn't Nani, that it was Dad. We go running out to the guest house. Judy was with me, and the two of us pulled Dad down on the floor, and we started CPR on him. And the whole time, he was sitting there smiling at me with his eyes, staring right at me, that shit-eating grin that everybody knows, that he just looking at me.
I saw him right before he left for the desert when he passed away.
It was just really hard. I tried to talk to my dad about Dominic's death, but he didn't. At that time, he just wasn't really ready to talk about it. I remember seeing my dad cry for the first time. We were at Pasantino's funeral home in the Northeast. And I remember that there was a point where only, I think it was just my dad and maybe Scoots went into the room where Uncle Dominic's body was. And I saw my dad put his hand on Dominic's hand. And I heard him say something like, "Oh, Doc, why did this happen? Why?" And that's the first time I saw my dad cry. I think my dad never imagined that Dominic would die before him.
Oh, man, I really love Doc. And I can't tell anybody how much I really miss him. It's just, there's no way for me to say how much I miss him. He was a good person, babe. He was such a good person.
That's a strong bond between brothers and sisters.
Absolutely.
Between siblings, I mean.
Both have the same blood, Mom, babe. And that blood is thick, babe. You both have the same blood, babe.
Every day of my life, I say a prayer for Dominic Tutera and Lucille and the three kids and their children. And I do it for my own family and for the Tutera family. I don't care how late it is or what. I can't go to sleep unless I say a prayer for them.
If I had to choose a father, he would be on the equal level of my own father. He'd share the platform.
Not a day that goes by that I do not mourn him. His presence is with us. I feel it all the time. I literally can hear him. I can hear Doc at certain times when I do something. I can hear how he would respond.
It kills me, but I know he got the winning ticket because, it's hard on all the rest of us, but I look at all of his friends and all the people we take care of that are suffering so much, and he was doing what he loved, and he went out smiling, and I know he was happy.
I'm not interested in how big and how much or whatever. Your reputation is all you take with you, and I'm sure that they learned that from Dominic.
No matter where we are working, we're working toward that common goal of always making sure that our name stands proud, because our name is our business. One slip up is all it takes to ruin the name. I used to always live by the motion of, if you don't want it in the front of the Kansas City Star publicized, then don't do it.
My dad used to always say that a person is like a glass of water. When you put your finger in the water, a void opens up perfectly fit to your finger with no other exact duplicate to fill that void. But when you remove your finger, the void fills perfectly as if it was never there. Through this, he taught us the importance of family, because family continues on forever, even when you are gone. I can say, however, the glass will never be as full, the water is warm, and the glass is clear as it was when you were here. Doc, you did great. I love you.
I see all of their dad's good qualities in all of them. However, I'm still mad at him for dying at 70. But what keeps me going is my family, my children, my grandchildren, and that's what everything means to me. I thank my mom and dad every day for raising me the way they did and the way that they gave Dominic the strength, and I know they're up there praying for us.